Hey, and welcome back. I want to talk about something I've never really heard anyone name directly, but so many women struggle with this. Why most competent, perceptive, high functioning women I know keep ending up in relationships where they lose themselves completely with guys who are taking advantage of them. And I am going to talk about why this has nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with what we as women have learned about belonging, what is required of us to belong. So I want you to stay with me on this one because I think by the end of this episode, something is going to click for you that has been confusing for a really long time. Maybe you've been working in therapy on this for a while. I'm going to break it all down to make it super, super clear. But first, I'm the trauma teacher. I'm Janice Holland. I'm a licensed therapist, certified trauma model therapist, and founder of the Courageous Living Framework. I am so glad that you're here. This show exists because I believe that understanding the why behind your patterns, the why behind the things that keep happening in your life is what actually changes for you. It's not your willpower or positive thinking or trying harder or understanding. All that's great, but we need to know why. And today I'm going to dig deep into one of the most common patterns that I see in women I work with. I struggle with this too, and it's very misunderstood. So let's get into it. I want to start by describing someone to you, and I want you to notice if you recognize her. She is exceptional at what she does professionally. She reads people well. She makes fantastic decisions. She has excellent instincts that she trusts at work and with her friends, with her children, in most areas of her life. People come to her for advice. She is the person others rely on, and she is not naive. She's not a pushover, and she's sharp. She's self-aware, and she has done a lot of work on herself. She reads the books, goes to therapy, and yet she keeps ending up in relationships that require her to shrink, to accommodate, to overfunction. Then one day she wakes up months or years in and realizes she doesn't recognize herself. She's completely disappeared inside this marriage, inside this relationship, but she's dynamic everywhere else. And the question that haunts her is, how did someone like me not see this? I'm going to answer that question today, really answer it, not with a list of red flags to watch out for, not with attachment theory or talking points, but with the actual mechanism underneath this, why this keeps happening to so many incredible, powerful women. Because once you understand it, the self-blame starts to dissolve, and that's when real change becomes possible. So we're going to rewind. It starts early. To understand what happened in her adult life, in your adult life, in adult relationships, we have to go back to where it started. Most of the women I'm describing grew up in environments where there was a very clear, consistent message, sometimes directly spoken, sometimes unspoken, about what she was supposed to be or allowed to be. She needed to be accommodating, quiet, agreeable, manageable. She was taught through thousands of small moments that make up childhood that her job was to read the room and adjust herself to it, that her emotions were inconvenient, that her opinions weren't really the point, that keeping the peace was more important than telling the truth, including her own. Some of these women grew up with parents whose moods were unpredictable, a little unstable, so they learned to track those moods consistently, constantly monitoring, anticipating, adjusting, because staying one step ahead of the emotional weather was how you stayed safe. Some grew up being told explicitly, girls don't behave that way, don't say that, don't want that, you're not allowed to do that. Their desires and perspectives were constantly minimized or dismissed until they just learned to stop offering them. Some grew up in homes where love was conditional on performance or on being a good girl, being enough, being easy to get along with, pleasing, where approval came when you managed yourself well and disappeared when you didn't. This is key. Some experience things much harder than that. Violation, abuse, silence, the message delivered in the most devastating ways that their body, their voice, their interior world didn't matter. The details are different for everyone, but the core experience is the same. You are not emotionally safe here, and your job is to make yourself fit. Now, here's where it gets really important because what happened next is not what most people expect. When a child grows up in an environment like that, the common assumption is that she simply gets wounded and stays wounded, that the unsafe environment damages her and leaves her less capable. But that's not the full story. In fact, it's not the story most of the time, and it misses something really extraordinary that happens in these girls. Because when the threat is relational, when the danger lives in other people's moods, other people's reactions, the unpredictability of the environment, the child does something remarkable. She develops a hypervigilance inside herself that is specifically, precisely tuned to reading people and environments really, really well. She becomes exceptionally attuned. She learns to detect micro shifts in someone's tone before they've said a word. She learns to anticipate needs before they're expressed. She synthesizes dozens of signals simultaneously, body language, energy, what someone isn't saying, and she arrives at an accurate read of the situation almost instantly. This is not a trauma symptom. Well, it begins as one, but it becomes something else entirely. Because while she is developing this incredible perceptual ability, she's also growing up. She's going to school, she's reading, she's learning, she's building her mind. And here is the critical piece. The world of ideas, of learning, of professional development, none of that is in the threat zone. None of that is where she got hurt. So she can pour herself into that freely, into her interests, into her achievement without the inhibition and the guardedness that shuts down everything else relationally. And what happens when you take hypervigilant intuition, the ability to read people and environments with precision, and you integrate it with a developing, well-trained intellect? You get a superpower. You get the woman who walks into a room, immediately understands what's happening, who trusts, who she can trust, who she can't trust. Her gut is always right. She can hold both data and instinct at the same time and make excellent decisions from that combination. She is a powerhouse. This is not separate from her difficult childhood. It grew directly out of your difficult childhood. The professional brilliance, the perceptiveness, the ability to read people in situations with such clarity, was built in the fire and of an environment that required you to be that sharp just to feel safe. I want you to really let that land for a moment. Your superpower came from the wounding environment, not despite of it, from it. But here's what that same environment could not give her or you. Because the threat was relational, because intimacy was where you got hurt, dismissed, overridden, silenced, and never got to develop your relational self and safety. Think about what it takes to develop a healthy relational identity. You need to be able to have a need and express it without it costing you connection. You need to be able to say what you actually think and have it received. You need to experience your interior world, your wants, your discomfort, your knowing being responded to with respect and care. She didn't get that. Not in the relational space, not at home, not in her early intimate experiences. So while her or your professional self was sprinting and developing and integrating and becoming exceptional, your relational self stayed kind of in an arrested development. Not because you weren't capable, but because it was never safe enough to grow there. So this woman enters adulthood with a fully developed, trusted, integrated self in one domain and a developmental gap in the other. And this is where the story takes the turn that most people don't really see coming. We need to talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough in conversations about relationships and healing. We are mammals. That is not a metaphor, that is biology, and it matters enormously for understanding what happens. As mammals, we are wired at the most fundamental level to belong, to operate in a group. It's not a preference. It's not a I'd like to have that. It is a actual survival imperative. Our nervous system does not distinguish between physical danger and the threat of social rejection or abandonment. For most human history, being cast out from your group meant death. And the body remembers that. Connection to our people, to our family, to our intimate relationships, to those we call ours, is not optional for a human nervous system. It is oxygen. So when a young girl is growing up in an environment where her authentic self, her opinions, her needs, her voice, her knowing consistently creates friction, creates distance, creates a threat of losing connection, her nervous system does the most intelligent thing available. It learns to set that self aside. She learns that the version of herself that accommodates, that agrees, that makes herself manageable, That version gets to stay in connection. That version doesn't get rejected. That version belongs to the family, to the group. And so she dissociates from her own interior, from her own wants, from her own discomfort, from the clear signals her body and mind are sending her, because staying connected to those things threatens her belonging. And belonging was not negotiable. It will never be negotiable. This is what we call self-abandonment. But I want to be very clear about something. This is not weakness. This is not a character flaw. This is not stupidity. This was a child solving an unsolvable problem with the only tools she had. Self-abandonment kept you connected. Dissociation kept her in the room. Becoming what others need us to be was how we secured the one thing our biology was screaming we could not survive without. So she gets good at it. She's fluent in reading what others need and becoming that. She's practiced at setting her own knowing aside in the service of relationships. That over time stops feeling like a strategy. It starts feeling like the authentic you. So now she grows up. She enters adult relationships. And here is where the developmental gap and the biology collide. We tend to assume that women who grew up in emotionally unsafe environments will eventually encounter real safety, and that when they do, they'll recognize it, choose it, and heal. But that is rarely what happens. What happens instead is that she finds familiarity, and familiarity doesn't feel dangerous. It doesn't set off the alarms. Our nervous system recognizes it. It feels like home. The dynamic that required you to accommodate, to shrink, to prioritize someone else's need, to abandon yourself, abandon your emotional world over the read of somebody else's and what they need to make yourself manageable. That dynamic doesn't register in your nervous system as a threat. It registers as normal, as home, as love even, because it matches the original environment. It matches the relational template that was built inside, and your nervous system still running that original program interprets familiarity as safety. So the hypervigilance that catches everything else, the superpower that reads rooms and detects misalignment so brilliantly at work, it goes quiet, it goes offline at home because this doesn't look like a threat. It looks like home. So the instrument that you use everywhere else, that it works everywhere else, was not calibrated to the relationship frequency. And so this is the piece that I think is so important to understand and so rarely named. You aren't simply overriding your instincts in a relationship. In the relational domain, you were never given the conditions to develop instincts of your own in the first place. The relational self that was built, the one that learned to disappear in order to stay connected, is still doing exactly that, fluently, automatically, without a conscious permission. It's like a native language. She doesn't find an unsafe relationship because she's drawn to dysfunction. She finds one because the dynamic feels like the one place in the world where you already know how to belong. And so the split deepens. The professional self keeps growing, keeps achieving, keeps being the person everyone relies on. And the relational self keeps replaying the original wound in a new form, looking for resolution that never came the first time, until something finally breaks. When the relationship ends through betrayal or collapse or a slow, terrible realization that she has been disappearing for years, the question she is left with is not really about him. It's not about the partner. It's about yourself. Who am I in relationship when I'm not performing or belonging? Most of us have no idea. What do I actually want? Who am I when I'm not organizing myself around someone else? Is there a version of me that gets to exist in intimate spaces the same way she exists at work and everywhere else? These are not small questions. They are the questions the split has been protecting her from her whole life, because answering them requires something that was never safe to build before. Not until now. A relational self that comes from the inside, not constructed from reading what others need and becoming that, but built from her own interior, from her own knowing, from the trust in her that she has in every other domain in her life, but has never been allowed to bring to the relational space. And this is what I want you to hear. The self-blame that comes after the rupture, after the betrayal or divorce or whatever happened. How did I not see this? What is wrong with me? How could someone like me, I'm so capable and strong, end up in this place? You ended up here because of a developmental gap that was created in you long before this relationship, a gap that was the logical result of an environment that required you to abandon yourself in order to belong. You didn't fail. You did exactly what you were built to do. The question now is, are you ready to build something different? So I want to close by naming what I believe the real work is after relational rupture, because I see a lot of women spend years in the wrong kind of work, processing the relationship, analyzing him, trying to understand why he did what he did, cataloging the red flags, researching narcissism, reading every book about attachment. And I'm not saying that work doesn't have value. I've engaged in it. Understanding patterns matters, but none of that closes this gap. The real work, the work that actually changes what happens next, is ending the dissociation, is coming back to yourself in relational spaces, learning to stay connected to your own interior, your own instincts, your discomfort, your clarity, your knowing without the terror that doing so will cost you everything. It is rebuilding from the inside the relational identity that never got to fully develop, not by becoming harder or more guarded or less open to love, but by becoming coherent, one person, the same person in every room you walk into, someone whose instincts she trusts everywhere, including in the places where she was taught she couldn't before. Someone who doesn't have to choose between belonging and being herself. Makes me want to cry. That is what courageous living actually means to me. Not bravery in the dramatic sense, not white knuckling through difficulty, the willingness to trust yourself in the one place you were taught that your trust didn't get to matter. That's the work, and it is absolutely. So if this episode hit something real for you, I want to hear about it. I would love for you to drop a comment. I read all of them and respond. You can do it here. You can come find me on Instagram and send me a DM. My handle's the same on all socials, the trauma teacher with a period between the and trauma. I would love to connect with you. I want to hear what landed. And if you are really recognizing yourself and you want to do this work that we've talked about, you are a high functioning woman, you know that you're smart and capable and mature, and you're understanding now why this gap exists in your life. I've got lots of great resources for you. They're in the description. I have a digital studio you can use to work on with your own or with your therapist. I've got sessions that we can join and jump in together on. Lots of great resources available. I would love to connect with you. Please send me a DM or put in the comments if you want to connect. And I will see you in the next episode.